Welcome, everybody, to this series on vitality and how to nourish it with food and beyond. I'll be giving a total of 7 talks, and today I'm going to start with a very foundational topic, which will set the stage for all the other talks to come. And it's about the various connections between stress, hormones, and vitality. I personally learned about these various connections throughout my professional journey, and they allowed me to make sense of my personal experience and of the experience of many of my clients. So my name is Claudia Kaiser. I am a holistic nutrition and eating psychology coach with a special focus on hormonal balance and fertility. And usually when I give this talk, I talk about fertility, but who talks about fertile energy actually talks about vital energy. And this is the message I want to start with, that our vitality, our fertility, our creativity, our sexuality, our ability to feel joy and just our desire for life, our ability to express, to intuit, to concentrate, to trust, to devote ourselves. It's all the same life energy, just expressing in different forms, depending on the energy center we're looking at. And I like to illustrate that concept through the chakra system, which is a beautiful way and very visual way to understand this. Because in the chakra system, the idea is that life energy flows from the root to the crown. And on its way, it's expressing in different ways, from more physical, primal ways to more elevated and spiritual ways. But it's always the same energy. And the consequence of that is that really your vitality is your health, is your zest for life. And if you want to be vital, or if you want to be fertile or creative, or have more sexual energy also, you need to look at your vitality. It doesn't really matter where we look at, we could also look at our fertility. It always comes down to the same, because they all go hand in hand: health, fertility, creativity. And I actually like to make the comparison with a soil when I talk about the health and fertility of a body, the vitality of a body. Because when we think of a healthy soil, we think about a soil that is rich and moist and full of life. So many organisms, bacteria, worms, insects, plants, animals are living in it, on it, or from it. So it's buzzing, it's alive, it's colorful, it's productive. And I invite you just for a moment to close your eyes. Feel your body. Take a deep breath. And drop into your heart. So feel your heartbeat. Take note of it. Take another deep breath and drop into your belly. Feel your belly. And ask to see your soil. And now an image might pop up, or a sensation, a feeling, a thought, a knowing. For everybody it's different. But just take note of the quality of your soil. How vital is your soil? How alive is your soil? Is it buzzing and fertile and rich? Or is it rather dry and barren? Or maybe even too moist and too heavy? Just take note, there's no right or wrong. It's all just information for you at this point in time. And if we look at the various connections between these different expressions of our life energy more through a scientific lens, one of the linking factors are hormones. So in a way, our hormones are the bridge between everything that's going on in our life, in the personal realms, in our emotional world, in our mental world, in our spiritual world, and in our physical body. So everything influences hormones, and hormones then influence everything. They regulate everything. Because sometimes when we hear the word hormones, we limit our understanding or our association to fertility, sexuality, menstrual cycle. And yes, these are all important parts of the metabolism that are influenced by hormones or regulated by hormones. Menstruation, very sensitive to different hormones. We're going to look into the different hormones later. Sexuality, of course, your libido, your desire for sex, but not just for sex, really libido is your desire for life. Your ability to have an erection as a man or to be lubricated as a woman depends on hormones. And of course, your ability to conceive, your fertility. But beyond these classical realms that we connect with hormones, there's so many more that are influenced by hormones, starting with your physical constitution, your physical characteristics. Some of that is, of course, genetic, and some of it is just your individual constitution, and some of it is also due to external factors, to what you eat and how you live. And women, for example, who have more estrogen will have a natural body shape that is more round and more soft, bigger breasts, and others will be more toned, more muscular, more linear. And that's not necessarily because you do something wrong or good, or there shouldn't even be a judgment around these forms, because they are also just a consequence of your individual hormonal makeup. So hormones govern body weight, they govern fat and muscle metabolism, how much we build or store fat or make muscle. They regulate appetite and satiation. They regulate digestion, urination as well. They regulate your body temperature, your mood, the health of your skin, your ability to concentrate, to feel grounded and self-confident. Also your ability to feel love and connection with other people or beings. Sleep, of course. We all know that when we sleep badly, how that influences our hormones. And when our hormones are out of balance, this also influences our sleep. So this is a beautiful example of this two-way connection. Hair growth is governed by hormones, and blood pressure, your immune system, and blood sugar, very important as well. I'm going to look at this one later a bit more. So hormones are chemical substances that are produced in your body in different glands, endocrine glands. And the whole system of all the different endocrine glands is called the endocrine system. I like to compare it to a company, a classical company, because there's a boss up there in the tower, in the head, the hypothalamus. And he has, of course, a right-hand manager, which is the pituitary gland, also called hypophysis. And whenever this hypothalamus up in his tower perceives that something needs to be done, he tells the pituitary gland to go to the different division heads and give them the order to do a specific work. So when the pituitary gland receives this stimulus, it produces a certain type of stimulating hormones, which then travel to the different divisions. For example, the thyroid gland, the adrenal glands, or our ovaries and testes. These are the ones we're going to look at today. There are many more. And in these divisions, then, the hormones are produced, which again travel to the cells to then perform a certain action. And when this work is done and the hypothalamus up in his tower perceives that the work has been done, it either stops the signal or it downregulates or upregulates depending on how well the work has been done. Before we look now into the different divisions, I want to say a word about endocrine disruptors. So endocrine disruptors are substances usually of chemical or toxic origin that disrupt this sensitive endocrine system, that interfere with it. It's as though there are people dressed in your company's dress code and showing up in the morning at the office, but that are not on your pay list. But as you can imagine, when you step into your office and there's already someone seated in your seat wearing the same coat as you do, that this causes confusion. You might be blocked from doing your work, or your work might be done in a different way, or it might be done too much, or twice as much, double. So these endocrine disruptors, they can interfere in a variety of ways that are also still being researched and discussed controversially. But they can block a signal, they can increase a signal, and they can just completely change a signal. They can change the creation, the transport, the binding, and the breakdown of hormones. And where do we find these endocrine disruptors? Well, in everything related to industrial production. So starting from fumes and pollution to plastics, of course. Plastic, we have it in everything these days. Food containers, plastic bottles, and so many more things. We find it in flame retardants, which are used for furniture, and of course pesticides. And naturally also there are some so-called phytoestrogens contained in certain plant foods like soy or flaxseed. And most of these endocrine disruptors have the chemical structure of estrogen. So if they are contained in plants naturally, they're called phytoestrogens, and if they are artificial, then they are called xenoestrogen, because they resemble estrogen, and so the body takes them for estrogen, and that creates issues, as we shall see when we're going to look into the estrogen department. But before we do that, we're going to look at the thyroid, and endocrine disruptors also tend to suppress the thyroid. And the thyroid, located in the neck, is a very important division in your body, just like the communication department in a company. I like to compare the thyroid to a communication department because it's related to your voice and to your ability to express your inner truth. And thyroid issues these days are very common, but unfortunately also very underdiagnosed because standard blood tests only look at TSH, which is thyroid stimulating hormone, which is the one the pituitary gland sends down to the thyroid to tell it to go to work. And the medical system assumes that if this value is normal, that means the thyroid functions normally, because if it wouldn't, then the pituitary gland would increase the stimulus, so TSH would go up. Unfortunately, there are more things that can go wrong, let's say, in the thyroid. So it's not just about the thyroid responding well or not, it's also about the conversion, for example, from the inactive form of the thyroid hormone T4 into its active form T3. Or in cases of autoimmune diseases, we can see the autodestruction of thyroid tissue. In that case, we would see elevated antibodies in the blood, but usually these are not checked for on standard blood tests. But if you suspect that something could actually be going on in your thyroid, I would encourage you to have them checked. So thyroid is responsible for many, many things in the body and in the metabolism, and basically connected or somehow involved in most processes, just like the communication department in a company. And so it regulates, for example, energy. So energy, of course, being closely related to your vitality, body weight, mood, body temperature. And it's also involved in the hormone production in other glands, such as the adrenal glands. And if your thyroid is not working optimally, if it's hypoactive, then you will feel fatigued because you lack energy. And the whole metabolism just is slowed down in order to save energy. So you might gain weight, and also be constipated because your digestion is slowed down. You might feel cold because energy should be saved, so the body is lowering the internal heating just when we try to save energy, and then we turn down the heating. You might experience hair loss on the head. High cholesterol is a very common but completely unknown consequence of low thyroid. And the sad thing is that often then when doctors see you have elevated cholesterol, they immediately put you onto medication without actually looking into root causes other than the always suspected high cholesterol foods, which, as we shall see in another of my talks, is not at all to blame. And low thyroid is actually often a root cause because thyroid is connected to blood sugar regulation and to the liver, and in the liver we make cholesterol. So everything is connected in the body. You might experience headaches, memory loss, in general dryness, dry skin, dry hair, dry nails. You might retain water in other parts of the body. So look a bit puffy. When you have your menstruation, you might experience abundant bleeding. In general, a low libido because your energy is low. We know that when we are fatigued and low energy, when our vital energy is low, our sexual energy is also low, and vice versa. So there might also be low fertile energy, subfertility, and even pregnancy loss. On the other hand, thyroid can also become hyperactive. So that's when the stimulus comes from the pituitary gland, and all the employees start to run around like crazy and become very accelerated and hyperactive and anxious. And as you can imagine, that speeds up things in the body, like digestion. You have frequent bowel movements. You waste a lot of muscle and bone mass. You don't really assimilate well your nutrients. You sweat a lot. And when it comes to menstruation, it tends to be rather scarce. Now let's look into the sex hormones. So we're gonna look into the two main female sex hormones and into the main male sex hormone. So estrogen is basically the department of our company where all the Aphrodite women work, the very female shaped women, round curves, big breasts, very feminine in their appearance. Because that's what estrogen favors. It's made especially in the ovaries, which is why women tend to have more of it. But small amounts are also made in the adrenal glands and in fat tissue, which is why also men have small amounts. And it's responsible for female body characteristics and fat accumulation. So it gives us the breasts and the round curves. And this is the reason why women tend to have more fat than men, and they need it for pregnancy and everything else. And it's absolutely fine and normal. Estrogen is a growth hormone. It makes tissues grow. The breasts at puberty and during the first half of the cycle, the uterine lining, the intramaterial tissue, but also other tissues, possibly, when it gets out of balance. And it's rather pro-inflammatory nature, which sounds bad, but it's not bad if it's in balance with progesterone, which we're going to look into next. It increases libido in women and makes them be moist and juicy and lubricated, not just in the vagina, but also in general, the joints and the skin. Everything will be well hydrated and lubricated. And estrogen is also involved in mood regulation. So when it's too high, and that's something we see more and more these days, I would even say it's epidemic, because especially of the already mentioned endocrine disruptors, which have estrogen-like chemical makeups. Then we see growth. Breast tissue will grow, endometrial tissue will grow, cervical tissue, and in men also the prostate tissue. We might see undesired growth, cysts and fibroids, and in very extreme cases, even endometriosis, which is when the endometrial tissue grows outside of the uterus, and even breast cancer or other types of cancers. Isn't it interesting that we're never told about the correlation between estrogen dominance and these types of cancer? Because that would give us the tool to really prevent, to do real prevention, because just doing diagnostic tests is not prevention. It's detecting something early, hopefully, to still be able to treat it, to cut it out basically, but it's not going to the root imbalances. And this is why I feel this information about hormones and the connection with stress that we're going to look at later is so important and so empowering. It allows you to have the tools to make changes that will really address the root causes, whether they are physical, emotional, mental, spiritual, and help you to rebalance, to make changes to help you rebalance. And so to naturally heal from unwanted symptoms, whether it's chronic inflammation, hormonal imbalance, fatigue, or menstrual issues. Yeah. So back to our estrogen, it also makes you retain more water. You will probably experience abundant menstrual bleeding, gain weight, have sensitive breasts, especially during the second half of the cycle, PMS, irritability, migraines, insomnia, maybe even rosacea, which is a red flush on your face, or problems with the gallbladder. And girls tend to enter puberty earlier when there's estrogen dominance. That's the term for high estrogen dominance, which can be absolute when estrogen is really too high, or relative when progesterone is too low, which we're going to look at next. And unfortunately, many babies these days are already born with this imbalance because their parents already suffer from it. And then they're happy to enter puberty earlier, but it's actually not such a good thing. Estrogen can also be too low. Some women tend to that imbalance more than others due to their natural constitution. So the women that have less estrogen naturally, who are more the body type with small breasts and less body fat, skinny types, they then run the risk to actually experience symptoms of low estrogen. So weight loss, menstrual issues, even losing the period, because menstruation is linked to body fat. And when the brain perceives that there's not enough body fat, it stops menstruation because it feels that it's not safe to be pregnant, that resources are scarce, and that there's not enough to sustain both mother and baby throughout the pregnancy. So we experience subfertility, we might experience miscarriage, dryness in general, dry skin, dry hair, dry vagina, painful sexual intercourse as a consequence, or generally an insensitivity, painful joints also that crack, that are inflamed, that are dry, loss of focus or memory, bladder issues like recurrent bladder infections, leaky bladder, emotional fragility, depression, sleeping issues, and also bone loss and night sweats, which are typically associated with menopause also. And it's true that in menopause, estrogen eventually drops. But throughout perimenopause, first progesterone drops and estrogen continues to fluctuate, which is why estrogen hormonal replacement at this time might be problematic. I'm going to say a bit more about that when we talk now about progesterone. So progesterone is the other female hormone, and these are more the mother types. Because as the name says, progestation, progesterone is especially needed for pregnancy. It's produced in our ovaries and also in small amounts in the adrenal glands. So men also make it. And it's an anti-tissue growth hormone, balancing out estrogen ideally. It's regulating and maintaining the uterine lining until it's clear whether or not the egg has been fertilized, and then supports the growing fetus if it's been fertilized. It's important for lactation. It's anti-inflammatory, again, a counterpart to estrogen. it regulates emotions and sleep. It generally relaxes us. It slows down digestion and it relaxes us. So it's important for our ability to rest, digest, and fall asleep easily. And we usually don't see an excess of it unless we are actually on progesterone hormonal replacement therapy, and then we might sometimes unintentionally overdose, and then we might feel completely lethargic and overly tired and not be able to really function. But usually it's rather on the low side. And you will understand later why that is so, because it's very much related to stress. It's very stress sensitive. And so this is the other epidemic, that progesterone is just too low, that creates then a relative estrogen dominance, which is why I say estrogen dominance is epidemic, because it's either relative or absolute, and either due to low progesterone or this excess of estrogen that we also get from the environment. So progesterone, when it's too low, we will definitely have issues with our menstrual cycle and fertility. So we will have symptoms of subfertility, which doesn't necessarily mean you're not able to conceive, but it will be more challenging to maintain a pregnancy. You will experience irregular cycles or a lot of pain during cycles, brown spotting, and rather short cycles. So relatively few days between the bleedings. The shorter, the more it's an indication that progesterone is low. Although in some cases it might also be completely a different picture, but that's generally speaking. The night sweats that I mentioned and the heat waves are also very typical on low progesterone. And as I mentioned, this is the hormone that drops first when we enter perimenopause and then menopause. And so if we then go onto estrogen, hormonal replacement, we actually make this imbalance worse. Even though it might help us with hot flashes, etc., in the short run, it might make this underlying imbalance worse. So often we're better off by, if we go onto hormonal replacement, of course, by using progesterone. But ideally, this is our last resort, and we first try to balance it out by reducing stress and improving nutrition, and also looking into toxic beliefs and mindset, etc. Low progesterone will give us the same or similar symptoms as estrogen dominance, especially during the second half of the cycle: painful breasts, PMS, cysts, endometriosis. In general, we might feel more bloated and constipated, anxiety, water retention for some women, itchy legs, and poor coordination. Let's now look into the male department, our testosterones, our alpha males. As the name indicates, testosterone is made especially in the testes of men, which is why they have much more of it than women. We make also small amounts in the ovaries and in the adrenal glands. And some women a bit more than others. The function of testosterone is especially connected to energy and vitality. If you think back of the chakra image and the red color at the bottom, at the root, the vital energy and the sexual energy, this is testosterone as well. This is why men also tend to have, the higher their testosterone, of course, a higher sex drive. And women who have a strong fire energy tend to have a higher sex drive, naturally, because they make a bit more testosterone. It gives them also self-esteem and assertiveness, sometimes even up to aggressivity. It makes hair grow in specific parts on the body. that are less desirable for women usually, and in general gives us these male body characteristics. So if women have too much of it, then they will have these male body characteristics. And if we think of some female athletes, they even look for that by injecting themselves androgens. So we will build more muscle, have a bigger torso, grow hair in areas that women usually don't grow hair, such as the chest, the face, the legs, the back. We might lose hair on the head. Acne is also very much related to increased testosterone and greasy skin. PCOS means polycystic ovarian syndrome. There's a correlation with high testosterone and also high prolactin in women, which in turn is related to blood sugar imbalances and insulin resistance. In this case, we will see rather long cycles, so a lot of days between the bleedings, more than 35 days possibly, which indicate that we're actually not ovulating, and as such are actually not fertile and cannot conceive, even if then at some point we might experience a so-called estrogen breakthrough bleed. But it's not a true menstruation. We might indeed show more tendency to be aggressive, but also anxious, and skin tags for some women. If it's too low, now speaking more for the men, which in men usually goes together with increased estrogen. In women, it's different. If women have too much estrogen, it tends to be converted into testosterone in some women. In men, the more estrogen they have, it seems that it lowers their testosterone and in a way feminizes them more. So they will gain weight, they will store more fat, become rounder and softer in their body shape. Also have sometimes develop even man boobs, breasts, be more fatigued because they have less energy, and as such also lower libido, which also might lead to sexual dysfunctions such as erectile dysfunction or fertility issues. They might be tired and have mood swings and be depressed and lose their hair and also lose their bone mass. The last division we're going to look at is the adrenal glands, where we make stress hormones. And when I say stress hormones, I say adrenaline and I say cortisol. Adrenaline is more the short-term acute stress hormone. Cortisol is more our long-term low-level stress hormone. And both are needed for us to function well, to be able to actually have energy and do things and get out of bed in the morning. So they're not bad. Stress sometimes has a bad connotation. They just get bad when they get out of balance. And we make these hormones in the adrenal glands, but also in fat tissue. And the function is indeed to give us focus, to give us energy so that we can get into action to either run or fight. That's the original fight or flight stress response, evolutionary speaking, very necessary. And for that, then you need really all resources ready for that fight or run for your life. So you need blood pressure up, you need blood sugar up, you need to be alert and focused and concentrated. Digestion is not that necessary at this point in time. The immune system also gets suppressed partially, cortisol being the natural cortisol. And it allows you to deal with the daily stressors. If you're in low cortisol, then you're absolutely unable to deal even with the lowest stressors, such as daylight or noise. So when cortisol is up and chronically elevated, then we will see a state of hyperactivity and acceleration. But it's not a true vitality. It's not because I am energetic and accelerated that I am vital. It's kind of an empty state. It's a state of feeling wired, but tired underneath. And usually there are sleeping issues. So difficulty to fall asleep or to stay asleep, which then makes matters worse because we are tired in the morning and we go for sugar or coffee to give us that kick, because coffee is actually directly triggering cortisol production in the adrenal glands. We're looking for that cortisol, so it gives us the mental focus and the energy to actually function in the day. It increases blood pressure, it increases blood sugar. So even if you take your coffee without sugar, it will elevate blood sugar. It tends to increase fat accumulation, especially around the waist, even in otherwise thin people. Might increase your tendency to have skin issues, such as eczema, bone loss, and in generally the loss of nutrients. Dysregulates blood sugar, can lead to accelerated aging, reflux and ulcers in some people, slow down wound healing, give you irregular cycles, and in general, create a state of inflammation. And inflammation underlying is, on the physical level, a major root cause for most diseases. So we need to go to the root of our stress, which we will look into later. What are the different roots of stress? Eventually, when this production of cortisol goes on constantly and we never go back to rest and digest mode, which is the opposite of fight or flight mode, then at some point we fall into low cortisol, which people today call burnout. And that is when we really cannot get out of bed anymore in the morning, when we are extremely fatigued, also very sensitive, as I say, to light, to noise, to everything, because we cannot handle any stress and we're negative, don't sleep well, have rather low blood pressure, salt cravings as a consequence, vertigo and nausea, a relatively weak immune system, and as such also an increased susceptibility to allergies and asthma. We might see bone loss and in general nutrient loss, frequent urination, nighttime urination, because the adrenal glands also regulate fluid management. Palpitations in the heart, excessive sweating, hemorrhoids, and in general muscular pains and weakness. So to summarize, the most common hormonal imbalances in women are thyroid issues, dysregulated cortisol and dysregulated thyroid, either too low or too high. Relative estrogen dominance, which means dysregulated cortisol in combination with low progesterone and relatively high estrogen, even if the estrogen values are absolutely normal. Absolute estrogen dominance, when cortisol is dysregulated, estrogen is high, and progesterone is either low or normal. And high testosterone, in some women, dysregulated cortisol, relative estrogen dominance, and high testosterone. In men, it's estrogen dominance in combination with low testosterone and also thyroid issues. And for all the imbalances, the underlying or common denominator is dysregulated cortisol, so stress. And by the way, in order to measure where you are, hormonally speaking, a blood test, like a single point in time blood test, is often not precise enough. For cortisol, it's recommended to get a saliva test curve throughout the whole day. And for estrogen, it might sometimes even be more effective to look at prolactin status or to also do saliva testing rather than blood testing. So the stress response, again, it's a genius mechanism. evolutionarily speaking, that helps us to save our life in cases of emergency. And in the process, it suppresses functions of the body that are not necessary for immediate survival, such as digestion, nutrient assimilation, tissue repair, your libido, and also your fertility. All of these are meant to go back, kick back in when you go into rest and digest mode. But when you never do, then they stay suppressed. And what exactly happens in the adrenal glands when that happens? So normally speaking, in the adrenal glands, we make a so-called mother hormone, pregnenolone, from cholesterol. And that already for many people is a big surprise, that the enemy, the demonized cholesterol, is actually so crucially important for our hormonal balance. We make our hormones from cholesterol. And in the session I'm going to give on fats, you're going to learn much more about cholesterol's role and all the myths around it. In order for that process to happen smoothly, we already need to have a well-functioning thyroid. So you remember, thyroid is involved. And if it's low, already this process is not working optimally in the adrenal glands either. For thyroid, we need vitamin D, we need many more things, many nutrients. From pregnenolone, we make progesterone and we make DHEA, which is another hormone I didn't mention explicitly. And from progesterone, we make aldosterone and cortisol. And from DHEA, we make testosterone and estrogen. Great. Now we have a case of emergency, of stress. All resources get redirected to cortisol because it's important now to save your life. So it's as though from the different departments, employees are redirected to go to support cortisol. And as you can imagine, then the work of progesterone, of thyroid, of DHEA is not done. And that has consequences, especially if that is our default mode. And when cortisol is up, it interacts with the pancreas, where we make insulin, because cortisol increases your blood sugar so you can run or think. And insulin and cortisol make your fat tissue grow. Your fat tissue produces estrogen, and estrogen also makes your fat tissue grow. So we have all these vicious cycles starting between the adrenal glands, the pancreas, and the fat tissue, in the end leading often to estrogen dominance in the process. And that can over time lead to burnout. Another word for that is adrenal fatigue syndrome, or better said, technically speaking, a dysregulation of the hypothalamus pituitary adrenal axis. That's really speaking in technical terms, because the adrenal glands are not really tired. They are structurally normal and healthy, yet cortisol output is affected to varying degrees by stress, and then resulting in unspecific symptoms such as fatigue, anxiety, insomnia, myalgia, so pain in the body, and so fertility. And if we don't attend it at the root, so really looking at where are the roots of my stress and addressing them, if we just go for taking a pill or surgery, really just trying to suppress or to cut out our symptoms, then over time the situation gets worse and worse. The volume has to be turned up and up, louder and louder. So we go into adrenal exhaustion and eventually maybe even adrenal failure. In Chinese medicine terms, this would correspond to a kidney yang and also yin deficiency, and using the chakra system, an underactive root chakra. So it doesn't really matter from which perspective we look at things, we'll always come to the same conclusion, even if we use different words to describe an experience. And so stress can really have many, many faces. Sometimes people think stress is only work-related, when you have a long to-do list. But you might be on holiday and be under stress. So stress can be physical, it can be nutritional. For example, when you eat a lot of processed foods, artificial foods, refined foods that are pro-inflammatory in nature for the body, stressor, lots of sugar, blood sugar ups and downs that are really stressful for the body. When you might just simply not eat enough food, or drink enough water, or breathe enough fresh air, rest enough, sleep enough. When you might be lacking nutrients, both macro or micronutrients, vitamins and minerals, or essential fats, essential proteins, and even complex carbohydrates, even though you might be getting enough calories. But since these days, many people go on many different diets, from low fat to low carb to keto to vegan, we might unintentionally create nutritional stress for our body when it doesn't get all the tools, all the ingredients that it needs, all the puzzle pieces to function properly. It creates stress in the body, because the body then thinks that you might die, and it wants to preserve your health, your well-being, make sure you're always in an optimal state. And if it's lacking important tools to do that, it gets stressed. You might be over-exercising, under-exercising, sitting all day in an office, never seeing the blue sky, the green trees, the grass. And nature is so important for human beings. And we know how it helps us to relax when we go to nature. So a lack of it is a stressor. We might have food sensitivities. We might have physical injuries or infections, pathogens, parasites that we're not aware of, but that create a constant low-level stress response, because the body is fighting, and fight or flight always means stress. Of course, stress can also be emotional. When we have undigested, suppressed emotions, energy in motion is what emotions are. And again, it's life energy, because there's only one energy. And if we don't allow it to flow, to express, to move through us, we somewhere along the line block the energy flow. And we contract, we hold it. And so whenever we do that, we create physical and emotional blockages to this energy flow. And that suppresses also our vitality eventually. So it's important to learn to deal with our emotions, both so-called negative, anger, fear, sadness, but also joy and excitement and being in love. How many of you know how difficult it is to sleep and how accelerated you are when you're excited? It is cortisol. You might be unable to forgive and still hold a grudge to somebody. Mental stress, when we have toxic thought patterns, we're talking negatively about ourselves, to ourselves in the mirror, criticizing ourselves, then we are being our own enemy. And then we are, of course, in constant fight or flight. Or we have toxic beliefs and thoughts about food or certain foods, and then we're in constant fight or flight. And when we ingest them and then feel guilty, we're still fighting them. So we're in stress mode. We might be for perfectionists. And in general, have an attitude of life is against me. We're going to talk about mindset in another session, but that's a major stress factor, and also spiritual stress. So when I am disconnected to something higher, then I might not see any meaning in my existence and in life itself and my purpose. I might be completely out of alignment with my true self, because I am disconnected also from my true self. My inner masculine and feminine are disconnected, and as such I might also have complicated relationships, which is more an emotional stressor. And so in a way, our physical symptoms are a doorway to find these stressors and to address them at the root, which then is really a gift. I'm going to talk about that too in the mindset session. So you see, stress can have really many, many faces. And we're going to continue this conversation throughout the following talks. The next ones are going to be nutrition related. And then we're also going to address mindset and relationships, food sensitivities. I'm the author of the Fertile Path book. Also, if you want to have everything also in written format and a bit more detailed. And as you know by now, when I say fertile, I also say vital. So even though the book is addressed to people who want to conceive, it's also relevant and useful to people who are not interested in that in particular. You might check out online programs. You might get in touch for a more personal guidance, consultation, metabolic profiling, to really understand better what might be causing you the stress, both in terms of soul lessons or a diet that's not exactly adapted to your needs. And I also propose retreats. For all of that, check out my website, www.caminodelafertilidad.com. And I thank you very much for your attention.